National Football League has announced a conference call for media to be held this Friday at 10:30 in the morning Eastern Time, which would be 7:30 in the morning in Oakland and the West Coast. And the email that I received from the NFL reads like this: We will conduct a conference call for the news media on Friday, March 25th at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time to preview the competition committee and health and safety agenda for the NFL annual meeting to be held March 27th to the 30th in Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, welcome. If you see this, by the way, share it on social media or tweet it out or both, or put it on Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever you most post your social media, or text it. And I continue. The call will feature NFL Executive Vice President of Football Operations Troy Vincent, which is generally the title of the person that they're grooming for to be the next commissioner. Keep that in mind. And Atlanta Falcons President and CEO Rich McKay, as well as the NFL Executive Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs and Policy Jeff Miller. And they will discuss the competition committee and health and safety agenda for the meeting. And while there's a way that I can access the call, I'm contemplating live streaming the discussion for everybody to hear. I'm going to check with the league to make sure that's okay, because it doesn't specifically say that's something that can be done. And so I'd like to, ask the league before I do it. Um, the question Jeremy asked, am I real happy? I'll get to that in a second. I want to stick to the matter of the competition committee, okay? Because this points to what I contend will be one of the most consequential NFL meetings in history if what I believe will happen actually happens. And I believe they're going to take up the matter of overtime yet again and change it, because if you're a fan of the game, you know that last season overtime is a little frustrating. And it was really encapsulated in the Buffalo Bills versus Kansas City Chiefs game, where the Chiefs scored in the blink of an eye. I mean, literally the blink of an eye. And the Bills had no opportunity to match it, to match what they had done. And it had they been able to do that, then who knows how the game would have turned out. I think the rule should be not who scores the final touchdown, but who has the most points at the end of the extra quarter. I think it should be really simple. You quite literally add a fifth quarter and then a sixth quarter, and that should determine the winner. It shouldn't be sudden death in the way that it's done. Now, I understand the alternative in that some broadcasters would like NFL games to finish in a more efficient time slot, so that because they know they're going to get their ratings, right? But where they get upset is when a game runs too long and it bleeds into their other programming. So they're thinking, gee, we're delighted. We're paying the NFL billions of dollars because they really do serve as lead-ins to programs that we want to make your favorites on our channel, right? But when a game, regardless of its importance, runs over a certain period of time, it hurts us. That's their point of view. I happen to look at it this way. If they simply move back the programming or handle it in a way where you can go to streaming, because more often than not, the channels that I'm talking about have streaming services that they either run themselves or contracted with, then either way, the rights holder wins. So, having said that, isn't it better to have a situation where an entire game is played out rather than it just stopping abruptly when a team scores and leaving all of us to wonder, well, gee, you know what? If there was actually another quarter, or if that particular overtime were played out as if it were a normal quarter, what would happen? Because I remember, I believe it was the um, the Washington football team. I believe got into the situation where they were down to what, a handful of cornerbacks, and felt the not, it wasn't the Washington football team. It was the Ravens. The Ravens were in a situation where they were basically depleted at cornerback, and it actually was to their benefit to try a play that was basically a one and done. If they scored, they went into overtime, but if they didn't, the game was over. And let's say it was different. Let's say that the Ravens knew that if they had an extra quarter, that they might be able to shift their personnel, gain an extra cornerback. In other words, let's say they could say, you know, we got a wide receiver over here, and we can groom, if we have enough time, we can groom that person to be the replacement cornerback if we knew we had an extra quarter rather than it being sudden death. So let's play that out. Let's say that under an extra quarter, okay, the other team scores a touchdown, right? But then your new secret weapon is ready. Your new cornerback that was your wide receiver is ready to play. And let's say that person becomes your shutdown corner and gives you an opportunity via an interception by that person to come back and win the game. You see what I'm getting at? So that kind of drama is what people watch the NFL for. And an extra quarter promises that, but it also promises the opportunity for organizations to take all kinds of creative approaches in altering their personnel to deal with injuries. But if you know that you're going into overtime and it's sudden death, that takes a lot of options away from you because you can't afford the luxury of prepping somebody else knowing that you're going to give up a touchdown. And that when you give up that touchdown, game over. So John Harbaugh figured, you know what? The way things are going, I might as well just bag it in right now. And I argue they gave up a game they could have won if they had enough time to adjust their roster and their approach. But again, because of the current situation, they don't have that. There are other examples as well. I really believe that just playing out the string provides the best opportunity for the best football yet. And here I'm starting to put a hand on that's essentially purist, right? And I'd like to know what you think if you want to comment, but I'm not satisfied anymore, if I ever really was, that sudden death was the answer. I know sudden death has been with us for a long, long time, but sudden death was done for broadcasters. It wasn't done for football fans. Football fans, you want to see the game go on and on and on. Now, I remember the historic 3 overtime game. I believe it's still the longest game in the NFL history. It's 6 overtimes, but the San Diego Chargers against the Miami Dolphins in the playoffs in 1981, where Kellen Winslow was literally dragged off the field, sweaty, blooding, and limping, and they had to basically hoist him back to the locker room. That game was as draining for me to watch as it was for him to play. But it hallmarked what the NFL is all about, what we now call the best in reality TV. So I'm going to find out from the league. That's why I believe this meeting coming up is so important, because it could very well, and I haven't seen the schedule yet, but it could very well spell the future of how NFL games are played from the perspective of overtime. Now, your response might be, Zenny, every annual meeting has something that's, of consequence to that NFL games. And, I get you. I contend, however, that overtime is more important because of its impact on broadcasters and its impact on broadcast timing. All right. Jeremy says, I agree. NFL overtime rules have been flawed. How long would the fifth quarter be? Well, same as a normal quarter. I'm not talking about a shorter quarter. I mean a normal 15-minute quarter. A normal 15-minute quarter. And if broadcasters get upset, in my mind, that theoretically would trigger discussions around making the game faster. And I don't mean faster time-wise, but I mean faster, well, yeah, faster in terms of time, in terms of how play gets off and everything else. Although I have to say, I think we've gone about as far as we should in that. Again, I come from the era, I'm 59, all right? Zenny 62, right? That's when the year I was born, 1962. I am old enough to remember. I never thought I'd get to a point in my life where I'd say that, but I am at that point. And you know what? It's good to be here because of the alternative. But I remember when we just had overtime and you play out the string. And I think that given the degree to which the NFL rules the ratings anyway, it would be pretty hard for broadcast to make an argument against what I'm talking about. I can't see that working, I can't see that working well at all in a meeting. Excuse me. I can see people making arguments for further engagement. I have long believed that the NFL should have its own microblogging platform in the NFL as opposed to being a slave to Twitter. Microblogging platforms are not complicated to build. The PHP code is something that I've used on a platform I've tried to build. You would say, well, why didn't I run my own? You have to, just like an app that I'm working on, at the end of the day, the question is, how are you going to get thousands of people to use it? And do you have the budget for it? Okay. Jeremy says, it's the injury aspect I'm concerned about, maybe an 8-minute quarter. I look at it this way. An injury, to me, injuries are as much an act of God as they are uniform or play. And I believe that if an injury is going to happen that impacts the game, it's going to happen regardless. If you want to curb an injury that occurs, the way the industry is structured in terms of how we tackle is more important, and the uniforms is far more important, in my opinion, than the timing of the game. And I say that because something really happened at the NFL Combine that I think is notable, and that the Combine featured the fastest players at a number of positions, including most notably offensive line. All right. Wide receiver we know about, the others we know about, but offensive line is faster than it's ever been before. And so because of that, I believe it opens up a greater possibility for broken bone injuries to occur because it's also fast with the defensive line this season. So what are we going to do about it? Hey, Eric, so what are you going to do about it? You would say, where's my evidence for supining this? A comment that Stanford coach David Shaw made about broken bones at the college level, and that he had never seen as many injuries that were based on broken bones in his entire career as last season. And actually, he said that when he said that, that applied not to the 2022 season. He actually did, in part, it applied to the 2022 season. But my point is, if that's the case at the college level of the Pac-12, then imagine what it is at the NFL level in injuries. And we've seen a number of injuries. So we have to have a change and improvement in uniform design, that, particularly about the helmet, where concussion should be all but impossible. You would say, how does one achieve that? That's a good question. I'm posing out an end game, a vision. And I'm saying the engineers have to match that vision, right? Uh, I remember a 1979 copy of the NFL magazine called Pro. And Pro was a the magazine you get at every NFL game you attended. This particular edition of Pro was given to me, ironically enough, at the game, if memory serves, I believe it was August 16th of 1976. That was my first preseason game. But at any rate, it had a take, if that's the right date. But I remember the artist's rendition and the subject like it happened yesterday, because it was about the future of the NFL and to a degree focused on uniforms. And it talked about the need to protect the head even then. But its take was to have these humongous helmets, almost like pillows, like that big. And it wasn't meant to be a joke. It was meant to punctuate the problem of concussions, which was known even back then. I mean, the NFL always known it's had a problem. It's just that what happened was that very simple numbers of people playing for pro football and in America, and the spotlight shown on pro football grew. And so with both, we had more people into what we now call the concussion protocol, and more of a focus on those problems because there's been more of a focus, particularly from a media perspective, on the NFL. And that exploded in 1984 with the advent of cable, and then, of course, in the early aughts with the advent of social media. So we've had this layer of media that has increased over the decades that has conspired, for want of a better term, to place a greater focus on this problem. And now it's being addressed. Arguably, it should have been addressed 20 years ago, but I digress. The question is, what kind of uniforms are we going to have into the future to make concussions a thing of the past? And that is the objective we should seek. So Friday, also, I'd like to know your wish list for rules changes, something that I could take into the conference call this Friday. What kind of rule would you like to see, new rule, or what kind of rule would you like to see altered? I haven't seen the list. I know it's flying around someplace, but I'd like to see the list of what's being suggested. But you know what? This sort of thing changes all the way up until touchdowns door time, right? And then the teams get to vote on it, and voila, we have something new. And then we get the final at the NFL Spring League meeting, or however they're going to do it now. Also, I wrote a blog post on this. The coronavirus is still alive and well. We are now into the Omicron 2 variant. And guess what, folks? It's hit Palm Beach. Now, it's supposed to be twice the rate of effectiveness in terms of getting into you as Omicron. But in terms of its spread, it's way at its infancy. But where are we now? Well, okay, in Palm Beach County alone, because of reductions of federal government funding, okay, we will see a close in Palm Beach County alone of a number of coronavirus free vaccine clinics. So we're headed the wrong way. And so just as we're getting out of the weeds, just as we're seeing low rates of spread, we're taking the walls down, we're taking the precautions down too early. We need to keep them up until we have a flat line that lasts for a month. Because right now we're low. But the last time this happened, we pulled back, and then of course we had a creep up because we had a new variant, right? Well, we need to we need to keep the pedal to the metal. I said I said metal, but I meant metal because it refers to material, metal. We need to keep the pedal to the metal, and make sure that this thing is behind us. So now I believe one of you asked me a question regarding Jameis Winston, and I'll get back to that right now before I before I skedaddle out of here. Um, it's Let me see what make sure my sound is off here. Jeremy B, student pilot. Hey Jeremy, he says, "You real happy with the Jameis Winston signing?" I am, because he's an elite quarterback that has had his own show, that has realized his reputation harmed by mistakes he made and errors his camp made in terms of who they deal with. Um, First of all, I'm talking about Erica Kinsman and the situation where, look, like it or not, there is a constant habit in the country and college where women go to get liquored up to do their business in sororities. This is known, but it is never written about to a point where you can find out about it online. The keywords that you would use to find out about these stories are covered up because they happen to apply to stories about, well, campus violations of the body, okay, on campus at parties. And that's extremely bad. It should never happen. But what happens is that rather than deal with the unvarnished truth about what goes down at these parties with men and women, there's one truth that surfaces about the bad things that have happened to young women. And if you're going to get people to deal with their drinking problem, you have to deal with, at a young age, you have to deal with what motivates them to drink. And I remember being in college like it was yesterday. I remember being at Texas Arlington and at Cal, and at UTA. I was never a big drinker at either place. Of course, I had cocktails, but I never in my life went out to get drunk. But there are women who learn their drinking habits in college, and they, in some cases, never get out of them. And I can tell you that as recently as a call that I received from someone just about, well, this week. All right. And we're both approaching 60. But this person's in rehab because she developed that habit back there. I'm not going to say where. And it stuck with her. It got her married to a great guy. Their marriage produced great, great kids and a lot of great things. But she finally came to the grips with the fact that she had to deal with a problem. Okay, I love her for doing it. I love her for doing it. But the fact of the matter is, this applies to Jameis Winston, that Erica Kinsman went out to do what her colleagues do and get, happy. They're underage. They both were underage at the time. Okay, and Erica knew a guy named Marcus who was making cards from the fake ID cards to get drinks. So you need to know that whole story, because a lot of people don't. And like Kinsman's auntie, Patricia Cornwell, was one of her attorneys, and said publicly that her niece, I'm putting it in sanitized ways, didn't date black guys. She didn't put it that way. She said black boy. And so she refused to believe that Erica Kinsman was interested in Jameis Winston. But the fact of the matter is, she asked, Erica did by text, her friend Monica if she should go with him and Ron Darby and the other gentleman. And Monica said yes in the camp. And she did. Now, they weren't going, to watch a rerun of Star Wars or anything. Okay. And this is her checking with her friends. This is all on the record. All right. This is all on the record. And then what's on the record is that she was the aggressor because she was drunk. Because she was drunk. And what happens is that at that point, people don't remember, particularly at that age, what they did. And they have friends to basically fill in the blank. And Monica filled in the blank, assuming something bad happened to her. But what Jameis had done is they had, their fun, if you will. Jameis dropped her off. But what Jameis didn't do, if he were my son, I would have said you should do always. And I will say this to anybody listening to this. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you're going to take someone out, call them. And I'm saying it someone because some people are in same-sex relationships. But it doesn't matter. If you're going to get involved as a young person, or any person, and you drink, and something happens of a sexual nature, call the next day and make sure the person is okay. And then just debrief with them. Hey, what happened? Are you okay? Da 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 da, right? Winston didn't do that, and people of his generation, what they do is they text. They're not about phone calling. I'm saying you make a phone call. Even if it's on voicemail, it protects you and that person. It shows the person that you care, rather than it being a hookup. From what I read, basically, she saw Jameis in the class, I think the next day or something like that. And he didn't say anything. And I guess maybe acted like he was trying to play it off, right? Like they had an encounter. Well, Jameis had a girlfriend, all right? So apparently he didn't want to get in trouble. But the whole point is, that's not a good excuse. If you did what you did, if you have a relationship with someone sexually, if a woman sexually, you need to own up to it. Because what happens is that when you don't own up to it, all right? When you don't own up to it, okay? When you don't own up to it, what happens to you are lies come out about you, and you don't want that. That's the biggest lesson here. I think someone else had, let's see here. Falcons fan wants to know, would you take a wide receiver or defensive end on Malik Willis at number 8 for the Falcons? I would say if I were the Falcons at number 8 and Malik was there, I'd take him. He is a person he's a generational talent. And if you're going to have a Marcus Mariota at the helm, who is a running, passing quarterback, then what better person to learn from Malik than Marcus Mariota, right? So it's logical, if that happens, for the Falcons to take him. Wide receiver, no, I'm not certain about that. I am not a fan of the Falcons' passing game under Dave Ragun. I have let that know before. And I believe that Mariota will fare no better than the middle of the pack within that system. He will do well running out of that system. But I'm not sold at all on Marcus being the answer. I could be wrong. But structurally, when I say structurally, I mean in terms of how the Falcons design their plays under Arthur Smith and Dave Ragun, I'm not convinced. And I'm not convinced. And so Falcons fan says, Arthur Smith, the head coach, calls the offensive plays. I'm not talking about calling the plays. Think about what I'm saying when I say structurally. I can give you the sheet to call the plays, right? But that doesn't change the formations. That doesn't change the blocking calls and assignments. That doesn't change the length of the pass pattern downfield relative to the quarterback's drop back. In other words, it doesn't change the physics of the design of the play. And I keep begging people to stop assuming they know about football and challenging their own knowledge with respect to physics. A lot of people do this. Look, I saw Coach Hackett do this. The Broncos. He draws up a play. It's a 7-step drop. It's featured on a video that's put on Twitter by the Broncos staff, Denver Broncos. Look at the way he draws that. And I would present it here, I just don't have time. But look at the way he draws it up. Do you realize at no point in his drawing that play does Coach Hackett actually draw in the blocking? Look at it for yourself. The first thing that I do when I design my plays is I draw in, well, among the first things after the formation, but I draw in the blocks because it's vitally important. Do I want a run block or I want, push out? And if so, do I want it to the left or the right? It really makes you think about what you're doing. But a lot of coaches get away with not doing that because there's no one to say, hey, by the way, what kind of blocking do you want? Where should the feet be lined up? Those are instructions for the player. Okay? Jeremy says, what team do you think has the best offense conceptually? Right now, I would say the team, in my opinion, has the best offense conceptually there was a set. Well, frankly, I like what the Patriots were doing. Hey, Falcons, thank you for the question. I like what the Patriots were doing at times. And if I go, I'd like to ask Josh McDaniels this. I'd like to find out his thinking about what he's thinking about when he draws a play, because sometimes he also violates this. But to answer your question, I'll honestly tell you, okay, there are not a lot of good examples out there at all, okay? I would like to tell you the Arizona Cardinals, but the main problem with the Cardinals is their dropbacks are inconsistent, which tells me that they don't drop back so much on footwork as they do yardage. So if you say drop back 5 yards, I'm going to get wildly different variations in how the quarterback drops back. But yet you're telling the receiver to drop back or to go the same yardage. Falcons fans, is any possibility the Bucs might not be as good as everyone says, hyping them? And I'm glad you mentioned the Bucs, and that's my answer. The Buccaneers have the best one. So good, I forgot about it. But the reason is out of necessity. Tom Brady came in, he was used to a short time passing game because he grew up in a different era that was more pointillist about thinking about the passing game. And it was influenced by Ray Perkins, but also Bill Walsh, even though Bill Walsh does not have direct imprint on their offense. His idea of dropping back by feet and steps in terms of rather than yards is all over that. You have to remember, a lot of what Bill Walsh brought into the league is now common. Throwing without a hitch step, for example. Or the biggest term of all, progressions. How many times have you heard a broadcaster use the term progressions for plays that don't even have progressions in them? Because the broadcaster doesn't know the play, they're just talking. Broadcasters do that. But you think that a play that really has one read and one throw, because Cal had some of those with Jared Goff, would have progressions, when in point of fact, they had none in a number of plays. When Tony Franklin have him on this show 3 times, and I need to have him on the 3rd, we'll tell you that. Because in some cases, you only have so much time, you don't need a progression. But they just unthinkingly blurt it out. Progression. Nah, there's no progression. But Bill Walsh brought into the league the concept of the progression, okay? And so Falcons fan writes, I'm going to miss Russell Gage. He's going to do very well in Tampa. Yeah, he will. But I think, and Jeremy was saying, ha, ha, ha. But Jeremy, and that was, I think, a belief to my comment about there not being a lot of great examples. They're not. The Saints were another great example in that Sean Payton really paid attention to timing and Although I think last year he got somewhat sloppy with respect to Taysom Hill. Um, and that's because Taysom Hill, even if you give him dropbacks, all right, but also it has to do with how there were some maladies there in terms of steps. Because I remember Drew Brees said, well, you have to go back. I believe he said so many yards in one account. I would need to re-research that, because what Drew Brees said to me led me to believe the Saints looked at yards drop back and not steps. But then I watched other explanations and looked at practice tapes from last year, video, during training camp, and they were using steps, and you count them out: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But steps are a common part. Dropbacks are a common part of the NFL because of Bill Walsh, and so it's far different from yards, but it allows you to really practice and control the timing of the football. And but within that, you have people who've come into the league that pay more attention to patterns and where people go than standard timing from the Bill Walsh era. Tom Brady came up in a different way. He brought that to the Buccaneers. Bruce Arians was more concerned. I think Bruce Arians, God love him, is a person that was more interested in spreading the defense and completing a pass, but I don't think he had the patience to teach a pointillist, scientifically oriented passing game. I don't believe that's important to him. He doesn't strike me as the analyst, scientific kind of guy. It doesn't mean he doesn't want to use it even if it works. If the guy that wants to use it has 6 Super Bowl rings, boom, right? That speaks volumes into his mind, or to anybody else's. But if you don't have that, and I'm sure there are other people who said, hey, Bruce, you need to shorten your timing, you need to work on this, and he probably resisted it. Because there are some coaches who believe, if I give you an offensive lineman an assignment, don't tell me, that you can only block that person in 1.3 seconds, because that coach believes he can get somebody else to do it. But what happens when the whole doggone defense is so much stronger and faster that you can't find that person anymore? People change. And that's what's happened. That's why I pointed to the combine and what happened, in terms of getting faster offensive linemen and defensive linemen. Historically faster. All of that has to change how you design a play. It's not going to, because a lot of coaches don't think that way. There are too many coaches who think in terms of, if I ask you to do something, I expect you to do it. Not even stopping to think if what they're asking the person to do fits the logic of physics. More often than not, it doesn't. And so Jeremy says, I agree with you, Mr. Zenny, about it not being a lot of good examples. I thought the 49ers had a good offense. The 49ers have an offense that, from a perspective of timing, leaves a lot to be desired. Where the 49ers excel is in their use of exotic running approaches without necessarily running the quarterback, with approaches that were done in the 70s and the 80s, but we didn't see a lot of today. Like, for example, having the running back go through the offensive line to execute a block, and then block for the other running back. Those are things to me that are basically simple and old hat. But if you're younger and you come from spread offenses in college, which really come to dominate the NFL, it's different. No, Jeremy, I'm not talking about zone blocking. Okay, I'm talking about the running back actually executing a block, all right, in line of scrimmage. I'm not talking about zone blocking. Zone blocking has actually been around since the Dallas Cowboys under Tom Landry. And, one look at the 1968 Dallas Cowboys playbook will tell you that. But you see, what I love about the Cowboys playbook, among others, mostly above all else, among all the others, is that the Cowboys would routinely switch from zone to man for man on a per play basis. You see, football has simplified. You would say, why did the Cowboys have that design, right? And it has to do with the era within which Tom Landry grew up and the impact that our increasingly computerized society was having on how people did things in a number of different examples through our lives. In Tom Landry's case, he was known for applying his engineering. Remember, he had a background in engineering. He didn't go to college to major in physical education. He was a mechanic. He was a if memory serves, a mechanical engineering major. And he flew bomber missions in World War II. In other words, he was used to, at a young age, working with mechanics, with motors and feedback and control theory. And it's feedback and control theory that led to the design of the flex defense, a zone defense against the run. So my point is that was the time of the rise of the managerial consultant, of a scientific approach to running businesses. And you would say, why is that important? Because that scientific approach seeped its way into football. It impacted, in a different way, how Sid Gilman thought about the passing game and how he developed the passing game. It indirectly, because of the times, led to innovation after innovation after innovation in pro football that's still with us today, including just, look at what Blanton Collier did with the Cleveland Browns. It was Blanton Collier that invented the draw play. So the set of innovations we've had that come out now have come at the college level with fast players. And because of the internet and the advent of the internet has had the biggest impact on football strategy other than the management era of football. Why? Because for the first time, it allowed people to take what was being done at the high school level, and people could see it and apply it to pro football. I remember I was trying to explain this to Mike Mayock in a way by asking him a question. This is at the NFL draft of 2009. It's on this YouTube channel. And he said, I said, don't you think that college has basically surpassed the NFL in terms of passing game complexity? And he looked at me like, I was growing another head. But his answer wasn't sufficient. He said it was because the reason I was wrong, essentially. Well, he didn't put it that way, but he was certainly a little annoyed, was that there was more time to work on a play. Look, I don't care how much time you have to work on a play. If you haven't changed the play's design, it's still the same play, okay? So he didn't get what I was talking about. But now, like Tony Franklin, among others, will tell you that football has advanced because of what has been done at the high school and college level, because there's nobody saying to them, oh, you're under this pressure to win one way. So if you're of a certain mind, and the kids don't mind, normally they don't, you can experiment. You can try different things. Maybe they'll come up with things. And guess what? It gets on the internet and it gets spread around. We didn't have that when I was growing up, folks. Okay? We didn't have that. So anyway, I'm on for much more time than I thought I was going to be, and there's been a good set of you that have stuck around and either listen to what I had to say or basically playing it loud to scare the heck out of your dog. I don't know. But remember, Friday morning at 10 o'clock, I'm credentialed to cover the owners' meeting. It's problematic that I go. We'll see. Jeremy says, you talked about the complexity of the college passing game years ago. Do you think that it will cycle back to power offenses? I think the nature of a power offense um, can be done in any way. Okay. Um, E. Smith went to the internet. Landry was a double E, electrical engineering, and who got a master's in industrial engineering. Thank you. The E degree may have helped on his flex defense, i.e., helped him in management. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And actually, it was the realization of that got me interested in football. I had no use for football until I found out about Tom Landry. Okay, because he made it okay to apply mathematics and a scientific approach to football. He succeeded at it, and it's more fun. The whole purpose of that way of thinking is to give you the certainty of a successful play, right? The certainty of engineering a win. I'm not saying it worked all the time, of course not, but it did work most of the time. Look at his record. But in today's NFL, passing games are sloppy. And they're sloppy specifically because they don't pay attention to proper drop back. And here's my issue with the Arizona Cardinals in particular. They don't pay attention to the physics of the blocking versus the pass. In other words, hey, if I'm going to throw a short flat pass, do I have my offensive linemen executing blocks so they don't get in the way of the pass? The answer for the Cardinals is a resounding no. This is fundamentally bad. So there was a game, I believe it was against the Packers, where the Packers, there were two games where it was the Packers, I believe, where they were the some place where they were on the end line. They only needed, I believe, a yard to score, and Kyler Murray wound up throwing an interception. Well, on one of those plays, it was, I believe it wasn't the Packers, it was another team, but it was the same situation. But to the other side, they call it a pass, which was a short, quick pass to the wide receiver. But guess what? It didn't make it because the ball hit the tackle on that side in the shoulder. Why? Because the tackle dropped back. You hear what I'm saying? He dropped back into the passing lane. He dropped back into his own quarterback's passing lane. And that's not his fault. That's Kingsbury's fault. So you would say, well, how do you remedy it, Zenny? Easy. You call a running style block. Why? You call a block that pushes the defender so you can open up that lane so that pass can get out of there. Now you would say, how did they get to that way? I thought about this a lot because it infuriated me to see that. That's bad football. And it happened because when they drew it up on the whiteboard, Cliff probably drew those circles for offensive linemen and didn't draw the blocks. And so there was no instruction that said, hey, block forward, right? It's either that or when they practiced it, the linemen weren't going up against anybody. So there was no need to think about how they're going to react to a defender. So they were just, practicing the pattern against the defensive air. Those are the two primary reasons I can think of that happened. The other reason is maybe just executed the wrong block, which gives credit to the possibility that Kingsbury actually designed the play properly, but his own people didn't run it properly. All right. So, all right. Landry's going to the internet. He says, now he says, the Cowboys hired a computer programmer. Yeah, his name is Qureshi for IBM. And he said to help in their drafting on the size and speed of players. Yeah, that was with their, the Cowboys had a scouting organization called Blystow V. And he says, Rayfield Wright was a football and hoops player at college. Right, that's right. This is all, looks like, yeah, right. Then he says he was first receiver in Dallas before moving offensive tackle. Right. Oh, they've done that. The Cowboys have done that with a lot of players under Tom Landry, and they got a lot of players like well, Thomas Henderson that way. In the person, in fact, if you're really interested in this, Mr. Smith, just look at my video interview with Gil Brandt, who I've known for years. I have 2 interviews with the great man, and I have to check and see how he's doing. All right. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Subscribe to Zenny62 and bookmark oaklandnewsnow.com. We'll see you.